In this video, I'll show you everything you need to know regarding the driving on the tracks in the Crossing Cup, the shroomless lines, the shortcuts and driving strats, and the coin routes. So yeah, what you're watching right now is, well, Baby Park. I don't need to explain how to drive this track, and the shortcuts and coins are right there. So now you know why this video is shorter than all of the other videos in this series. But without further ado, let's start giving her on Cheeseland, bud. Obviously, the driving on Cheeseland isn't that special because it's such a bagging track, but if you don't know how to drive this track, here you go. When the race begins, you immediately want to begin a left drift, and if you can, drift over the right of the little cheese hole. Charge up a super mini turbo and release it into a right drift as soon as you're on the following turn. Charge up a mini turbo and release it as you drive over the tiny patch of off-road. Holding left as you release your mini turbo helps as well. As you're driving uphill next to the cheese hole on the right, begin a left drift. Hold wide as you continue to drive uphill, then hold tight on the turn. Hold wide for a tiny bit on the straight after charging up a super mini turbo, then release it into a left hop. Hop over the cheese hole into a left drift. Shortly after charging up a mini turbo, around the time you pass the shadow, release your mini turbo into another left drift. Stay as tight as possible, and after passing the tight cheese hole, release your super mini turbo. Position yourself to the left before the ramp, and a little before the ramp perform a right slide, then trick off the ramp. Begin a right drift as you land, and you generally want to soft drift for the entire drift, at least until you're on the straight before the glider. Just after charging up an ultra mini turbo, release it into two left hops into a trick off the glider ramp. Make sure to dive down to land early, and perform a left drift as soon as you land. Soft drift where you can while driving as tight as possible. You'll be pretty far to the left when you can charge up an ultra mini turbo, so as soon as you get it, release it into a right hop into a right drift. Quickly charge up a mini turbo and release it into a left drift on the following turn, where you'll charge up a super mini turbo. As soon as you're past the turn, release your super mini turbo immediately into a right drift. Drift over the cheese hole, soft drift where you can, then release a mini turbo into a left drift as you approach the final turn. As you make your way around the turn, hold wide and position yourself toward the wide cheese hole. Release your super mini turbo into a trick off the cheese hole, then a trick on the two ending ramps. Begin a left drift as soon as you land, and just like that, it's another day in the office there, bud. After the race begins, you want to charge up and release a super mini turbo after the first turn, then a mini turbo over the tiny patch of off-road. Charge up a super mini turbo to release after the following turn. On the turn after that, chain a mini turbo into a super mini turbo. Trick off the ramp and begin a right drift as soon as you land. Release an ultra mini turbo, trick up the glider, and begin a left drift as you land. Release an ultra mini turbo just after you get it, and edge out a mini turbo before the next left drift. Release a super mini turbo into a mini turbo, and as you approach the cheese hole, release your super mini turbo into three tricks, and begin a left drift as soon as you land. That's giving her, bud! There's a ton of off-road on this track, so naturally, you have quite a few shortcuts. The main ones, however, include the cheese shortcut, which you can also perform shroomless despite it being really hard, and the two gliders on the second half of the track. There's not that much else for covering here since the highlights for the shortcuts and strats are the shroom spots. This is a pretty solid track for coin collecting. You can collect up to 7 coins while driving tight, and you have quite a few coin bunches you can rely on if necessary. You have the 3 wide coins on the first turn, the 3 wide coins on the turn before the boost ramp, and the 3 wide coins on the turn after the glider. You have a couple 1-coiners too, so coins shouldn't be a huge struggle if you take your opponents out of the equation. Anyway, Cheeseland has been covered, so let's get her going on Wild Woods. Wild Woods is a pretty basic track to drive, to be honest. Shortly after the race begins, you want to perform a right drift around the first turn. Keep a neutral drift for the most part and hold wide after the turn. Shortly after charging up a super mini turbo, release it into a left hop, then a right hop before tricking off the ramp. After landing, perform a quick right slide into a left drift. Release your mini turbo as soon as you get it into a right hop into 3 tricks off the ramps, then begin a right drift as soon as you land. Charge up an ultra mini turbo, which you'll do by soft drifting after cutting inside the barrel. Release an ultra mini turbo by low gliding, dive down, then hold back to perform a quick glider vector. Position yourself to the left of the landing zone, then begin a left drift as you land. Drift on the railing, and as you're about to clear the turn, release your super mini turbo, dip from the railing, and trick off the ramp. Begin a right drift as soon as you land. Soft drift where you can while driving tight, and perform a super mini turbo trick off the ramp. Once again, begin a right drift as soon as you land, but don't stick to the water stream. Just drive tight. Soft drift on the turn, then hold wide on the straight. Just before the ramp, release your mini turbo into a left slide slide into a trick off the ramp. The lily pad boost ramps will be situational, but in a situation like this, perform a quick right slide before driving off the boost ramp. Just before landing, hold left and tap your drift button to align yourself for the third boost panel, then drive off the second boost ramp. Do the same thing to align for the final ramp, but hold right and trick off the boost ramp. Trick off the ramp and begin a left drift as soon as you land. Chain 2 mini turbos after the last 2 turns, and would you look at that? You're giving her like it's your job. Summing things up, release a super mini turbo after the first turn and trick off the right path ramp. Release a mini turbo after the slight turn, then trick off the 3 ramps. Begin a right drift as soon as you land. Cut inside the barrel and release your ultra mini turbo in low glider fashion. Do a bit of glider vectoring and begin a left drift as soon as you land. Ride the railing and release a super mini turbo into a trick off the ramp. Release another super mini turbo and trick off the following ramp, then release a mini turbo before tricking off the final ramp of this section. Drive off the first 2 boost ramps, then trick off the final boost ramp and trick off the final ramp. Chain 2 mini turbos on the last 2 turns, and you're just doing what you gotta do, bud. There's not too much to talk about regarding shortcuts and strats here, but for the time being, here's how you typically drive the left path at the beginning. Pretty simple stuff. Now for the ending shortcut. You can shroom through it easily, but you can also do it shroomless. I'm not entirely sure if it's faster shroomless or not, but if taking the shroomless shortcut is in your best interest, you won't lose out on too much if it's slower. This track isn't all that bad for coin collecting. I'd say with perfect pacing, you could collect up to 6 coins while driving tight, which is pretty solid. Your other options consist of the 3 wide coins on the first turn, the 3 coins you can collect on the left path, and the 3 wide coins on the turn before the glider. So yeah, your main coin zones are on the first half of the track. The second half might be a struggle if you're running low on coins and are in the back. But with that, Wild Woods has been givenered. So let's finish strong on Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing is a pretty fun track in my opinion. When the race begins, slightly position yourself to the right and trick off the bridge ramp. As soon as you land, perform a left hop or slide into a right soft drift for the most part. Soft drift initially, hold wide, then soft drift on the turn. Just after charging up a super mini turbo, release it into 2 left hops into a right soft drift with the same general execution as before. Release an ultra mini turbo as soon as you get it into a left hop into a left drift. Hold wide on the glider straight and release a mini turbo off the glider. No low glider necessary. You can get a tiny vector by diving down for the coins, then holding back until you land just before the ramp. So trick off the ramp and begin a left drift as soon as you land. Release a super mini turbo just before the ramp and trick off of it. Begin another left drift as soon as you land and hold wide as you go off the bump. Soft drift where you can, especially as you're about to finish going around the turn, then release an ultra mini turbo into a right hop on the straight before the ramp. Position yourself to the left and after driving over the bump, perform a quick left slide as you land, then trick off the ramp. Shortly after landing, begin a right drift. Charge up a super mini turbo and shortly after getting it, release it into a left drift. Edge out 1 last mini turbo before the finish line, and bada boom bada bing, you're giving her. Adding things up, trick off the bridge ramp, then release a super mini turbo after the first turn. Release an ultra mini turbo after the following turn into a mini turbo off the glider. Trick off the left ramp, then release a super mini turbo into a trick off the first blue ramp. Begin a left drift as soon as you land. Release an ultra mini turbo after the big turn and trick off the boost ramp. Chain a super mini turbo into a mini turbo after the final turn. And now you know how to fully drive 44 out of the 48 tracks in this game. 1 more cup to go there, bud. You have quite a few spots where you can shroom on this track, like the off-road after the bridge. But if you pull a shroom at first at lap 1, I'd suggest shrooming in this patch of off-road. It's much more efficient. You can also shroom through the sand, as well as the ending shortcut, which of course is the shroom spot. But before talking about the coin routes, there are 4 seasons here, but the only one really worth going over is spring because of the additional ramps. Autumn and winter only remove 1 ramp from summer, and winter just has obnoxious off-road as well. Spring is the only unique season when it comes to new shroomless lines, for the most part, so yeah, yeehaw bud! This track is pretty great when it comes to coins. You can collect up to 8 coins while driving tight, and you have a ton of alternatives. You have up to 5 really wide coins on the first couple turns, the right coins after the glider, the 3 or 4 wide coins on the turn before the boost ramp, and the 3 wide coins on the final turn. So yeah, you should be giving her if you're scrambling for coins, since you got options regardless of where you are on the track. But with that, we're done with the driving on the tracks in the Crossing Cup. I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, stay tuned for next week when I go over the strategies on each of these tracks. We're just 3 episodes away from finishing the main series of how to play Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is pretty crazy to me. I really appreciate you guys sticking along the whole way through, and like I've been saying a lot lately, I hope you're excited for what I have in store afterwards. But until next time, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic day, and keep on giving her, bud.